The meeting between Putin and Trump became one of those defining moments where power dynamics played out in real time for the world to see. From the very beginning, subtle gestures and body language told a story that words alone could not capture. Putin entered with his usual confidence, measured, calm, and firmly in control of the room. Trump, on the other hand, appeared caught between trying to project strength and managing the weight of the situation. For viewers, the imbalance was clear. Putin was dictating the tempo, while Trump seemed to be reacting, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes passively, but rarely seizing the initiative. This was not just a simple meeting, it was a performance on a global stage, and the performance tilted heavily in Putin's favor. Observers quickly noticed how Putin leaned into every exchange, using silence and direct eye contact as tools to dominate. Trump, who is usually comfortable in front of cameras and thrives in confrontational spaces, looked less assured, as though he was trying to keep up with a rival who had already mapped out the game. Every handshake, every glance, every pause told audiences that Putin was controlling the narrative without having to raise his voice. The optics mattered here, and optics are everything in international politics. For the global audience, perception is as powerful as policy, and the perception was that Trump had been humbled. Moments like these don't exist in a vacuum. The imbalance rippled across the media instantly, creating an avalanche of headlines suggesting that Trump had been outmaneuvered and even embarrassed. Political analysts described it as a display of raw power politics, with Putin asserting dominance not only over Trump but indirectly over the United States itself. In the age of viral clips, the most telling fragments of the exchange circulated endlessly online: brief shots of Trump's uncertain expressions, Putin's calm smirk, and the overall sense that one leader was comfortable while the other was scrambling. Viewers didn't need commentary to understand what they were seeing. The visuals carried their own undeniable weight. What made the moment sting more for Trump was the broader symbolism attached to it. Trump has always branded himself as a strong negotiator, someone who could walk into a room and control the terms. Yet here, in front of the entire world, that image cracked. His hesitations and lack of firm pushback signaled weakness to critics and fueled narratives that he was too soft on Putin. For Trump's opponents, it was a moment of vindication, an event they could point to as proof of his vulnerability in handling foreign adversaries. For his supporters, it was a tougher sell. Some tried to frame the interaction as strategy, a way of keeping relations calm, but the visuals did not align with that story. Optics of weakness rarely translate into strength, no matter the spin. The deeper issue lay in how power was being communicated. Putin didn't need grand gestures to showcase authority. His command of silence, posture, and timing did the work for him. Trump, who often relies on bravado and bold language, found himself out of place in a setting where quiet confidence spoke louder than bluster. This clash of styles revealed much about how each man operates. Putin has mastered the art of subtle dominance, while Trump thrives in more chaotic, confrontational environments. But on this stage, subtle dominance won. The fallout was immediate and global. Commentators from Europe to Asia dissected the moment, many noting how the United States appeared diminished in stature compared to its rival. Even allies of the US began quietly questioning the strength of American leadership, wondering if this signaled a larger shift in global power dynamics. For years, America has been seen as the face of unchallenged leadership, but this incident reminded the world that perception of strength can change in a single moment. What makes this episode especially powerful for audiences is how relatable the imbalance felt. Everyone has been in a room where one person holds all the cards and another struggles to keep up. Seeing that dynamic play out between two of the world's most powerful figures amplified the drama tenfold. It wasn't just politics, it was human psychology on display, and it struck a chord with viewers who could instantly interpret what they were watching. The humiliation didn't come from one bold insult or a dramatic outburst, it came from the quiet, undeniable realization that one leader was completely overshadowed by another. In the end, the narrative became larger than the moment itself. Putin didn't just outshine Trump, he demonstrated how much global influence relies on perception. For Trump, it was a lesson in how quickly control can slip away when facing a rival who knows how to weaponize silence, composure, and presence. For the world, it was a rare glimpse into how power is performed and perceived on the international stage. And for the audience watching at home, it was impossible to ignore the clear imbalance. Putin was in command, while Trump was left exposed, a moment of global humiliation captured and replayed endlessly across screens. The moment unfolded like a textbook case of how diplomacy can turn into disaster when one leader loses grip of the narrative. In front of cameras and world leaders, the exchange between Putin and Trump spiraled into what many described as a diplomatic embarrassment of historic proportions. Rather than standing firm, Trump appeared hesitant, often nodding along or offering responses that seemed more like concessions than challenges. For a U.S. president who prided himself on being a tough negotiator, the optics could not have been worse. What should have been a moment to assert America's global influence quickly turned into a stage where Putin seemed to command authority while Trump looked uncertain, almost deferential. The problem wasn't just in what was said but in how it was said. Trump's tone carried none of the sharpness or conviction that his supporters had come to expect. Instead, he seemed defensive, caught between not wanting to confront Putin too directly and not wanting to look weak. The result was a muddled performance that left observers questioning where his loyalties truly lay. Was he protecting U.S. interests, or was he too concerned with maintaining rapport with Putin? The ambiguity became fuel for critics, and within hours, the narrative of diplomatic embarrassment swept across global headlines. It wasn't long before commentators highlighted the missed opportunities. In moments where Trump could have drawn firm lines, defended American intelligence agencies, or pushed back on Russian actions, he wavered. Each hesitation made Putin appear stronger, more confident, and more in control of the conversation. To diplomats and analysts alike, it looked as though Trump had surrendered the upper hand without even realizing it. Such missteps are magnified on a global stage where every word and gesture carries geopolitical weight. The embarrassment came not from a single slip but from a pattern of deference that suggested the U.S. president had been overshadowed in his own arena. What made this moment sting even more was the reaction at home. Lawmakers across the political spectrum expressed shock, with even some of Trump's allies struggling to defend his performance. Senators called it a betrayal of American strength, while intelligence officials privately seethed that their work had been undermined in front of the world. For the opposition, it was political gold, a moment that could be replayed endlessly to question Trump's credibility and toughness on foreign adversaries. For allies abroad, it was unsettling, a reminder that America's leadership might not be as steady as once assumed. The embarrassment extended far beyond one man, it reflected on an entire nation's image. Diplomacy relies on perception as much as substance. Even if no major agreements were signed or policy shifts announced, the way leaders present themselves matters profoundly. In this case, Putin's calm and composed demeanor was contrasted sharply against Trump's defensive and uncertain body language. Audiences didn't need to understand the finer points of international policy to see the imbalance. The visuals told the story, one leader at ease, the other on edge. In the theater of diplomacy, perception is power, and Trump's performance was widely seen as a failure to project strength. The media played a crucial role in amplifying the fallout. Clips of the event spread like wildfire across television and social platforms, each replay reinforcing the same conclusion, that Trump had been embarrassed on the world stage. Satirists turned it into comedy, analysts turned it into warnings, and activists turned it into rallying cries. The incident became more than a diplomatic misstep, it became a cultural moment, one that shaped how millions perceived Trump's leadership in the realm of foreign policy. What makes the humiliation so gripping for audiences is how it clashed with Trump's carefully crafted image. He built his brand on projecting dominance, strength, and mastery of the deal. Yet here was a situation where none of that seemed to materialize. Instead of leading the conversation, he was reacting to it, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes submissively. For his critics, this was proof that his tough guy persona was more performance than reality. For his supporters, it raised difficult questions that spin alone could not erase. Diplomatic embarrassment is not just about one bad day, it lingers in memory, shaping narratives for years to come. Foreign leaders take note, adjusting how they approach negotiations with someone perceived as weaker. Allies worry about the reliability of protection under U.S. leadership. Opponents seize the opportunity to exploit doubt. In this case, Putin didn't just win the moment, he secured an enduring perception of dominance that worked in Russia's favor. The consequences stretched far beyond the cameras, into boardrooms, embassies, and strategy sessions around the globe. Ultimately, this episode served as a reminder of how unforgiving the global stage can be. Every slip, every hesitation, every misplaced word is magnified under the scrutiny of millions. Trump, who often thrived in domestic showdowns where bluster could overwhelm opponents, found that international diplomacy plays by different rules. Composure, clarity, and command of presence matter more than volume or bravado. And in this high-stakes encounter, his shortcomings left him exposed. The embarrassment wasn't just personal, it was global, a moment that crystallized the image of a president struggling to stand firm when it mattered most. The reaction from global media was swift, intense, and merciless. What had unfolded on stage between Putin and Trump wasn't just treated as another political meeting, it was dissected, analyzed, and replayed as a defining moment of weakness on Trump's part. News outlets from Washington to London, Paris to Berlin, and even across Asia framed the encounter as a stunning humiliation for the American president. The headlines were strikingly consistent, using words like crushed, defeated, and overshadowed, leaving no doubt about how the world had interpreted the spectacle. The moment that was supposed to demonstrate diplomatic strength instead turned into an international firestorm, fueling debates on whether the United States had lost credibility on the global stage. Television clips dominated the airwaves, with commentators breaking down every gesture and pause. Audiences were shown side-by-side comparisons of Putin's calm composure and Trump's uneasy demeanor, reinforcing the perception that one leader was in control while the other was out of his depth. For media outlets critical of Trump, it was a feast. They framed the interaction as proof that his image of strength collapsed when faced with a skilled rival. Even traditionally conservative outlets, usually more sympathetic, found it difficult to spin the optics in his favor. The narrative of humiliation had already taken hold, and once the media machine started rolling, it was impossible to stop. Internationally, the coverage was even harsher. European broadcasters questioned whether America could still be trusted to lead in the West, pointing out how Putin had not only dominated Trump but also symbolically elevated Russia's influence. In the UK, newspapers ran biting headlines mocking Trump's failure to stand his ground. In France and Germany, analysts framed the incident as a warning to Europe that the old reliability of American diplomacy might no longer exist. In Asia, commentators noted how the exchange highlighted America's declining dominance, giving countries like China more confidence in pursuing their own geopolitical ambitions. Social media amplified the firestorm tenfold. Within minutes, clips of Trump's hesitant responses and Putin's smirk went viral. Memes flooded Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, portraying Trump as submissive and weak. Hashtags like #TrumpHumiliated and #PutinWins trended globally, and users from all political backgrounds weighed in. For Trump's critics, it was confirmation of long-held suspicions. For his supporters, it was harder to defend. Many resorted to claiming it was part of a broader strategy, but the visual evidence was too strong. On platforms where perception drives the conversation, Trump was overwhelmingly portrayed as the loser. American late-night shows jumped on the opportunity, turning the incident into satire. Comedians mimicked Trump's body language, replayed the handshake that seemed more like submission, and joked about Putin being the real leader in the room. What could have been dismissed as political theater took on a life of its own, becoming cultural commentary. Once something crosses from politics into comedy and memes, it embeds itself in public consciousness in a way that is nearly impossible to erase. The media reaction also carried deeper implications. Foreign leaders don't just watch these moments, they study them. When they see international press framing the U.S. president as weak or humiliated, it influences how they prepare for future negotiations. It sends a signal that America may not always project strength, and that gaps in leadership can be exploited. For allies, the embarrassment raised unsettling questions about whether they could depend on American firmness in moments of crisis. For rivals, it was a green light to push harder, knowing that even the appearance of weakness creates openings. Political analysts stressed how much of modern diplomacy is built not just on military might or economic strength but on image. A single televised encounter can shape narratives for years. This is why the global media's framing mattered so much. It wasn't just about mocking Trump but about redefining how America's position was seen worldwide. Every headline, every viral clip, every panel discussion built upon the idea that Putin had walked away the victor, and Trump had left the stage diminished. Even weeks later, the media conversation didn't die down. Think pieces, op-eds, and documentaries revisited the event, treating it as a pivotal point in U.S.-Russia relations. It became shorthand in debates about Trump's foreign policy legacy, often cited as the clearest example of him being outmaneuvered on the world stage. In a world where news cycles move fast, this story had unusual staying power, precisely because it struck such a deep chord with global audiences. Ultimately, the global media reaction cemented the humiliation. While Trump may have hoped the narrative would shift or fade, the coverage locked the perception in place. Putin wasn't just framed as dominant in that moment, he was portrayed as strategically superior, the one who had manipulated the stage to his advantage. Trump, in contrast, became the story of how a leader who boasted about strength had been brought down by his own hesitation. For viewers, it was compelling drama. For the media, it was a goldmine. And for history, it was recorded as one of the most glaring examples of how the world's most powerful office can still be undermined by a single encounter. The fallout from the encounter between Putin and Trump was immediate, intense, and far-reaching, spilling far beyond the room where it happened. What could have been remembered as just another high-profile diplomatic meeting quickly evolved into one of the most damaging moments of Trump's presidency in the eyes of critics and analysts. The perception of weakness was not just a headline for a few days, it became a rallying point in political debates, campaign ads, and late-night monologues. The global humiliation framed by the media translated directly into political consequences at home and abroad, leaving Trump struggling to reassert control over the narrative. In Washington, the reaction was swift and cutting. Lawmakers from both parties publicly expressed concern, with some even labeling the event a betrayal of American values and intelligence. Democrats seized the moment as proof that Trump was unfit to stand up to authoritarian leaders, while a few Republicans, usually hesitant to break ranks, voiced rare criticism, calling his performance a national embarrassment. The bipartisan nature of the backlash made the fallout sting even more. For a president who thrived on projecting dominance, being openly questioned by allies and adversaries alike was politically devastating. The intelligence community, already tense in its relationship with Trump, reacted with outrage. Officials who had briefed the president on Russian interference and geopolitical risks felt undermined, as if their work had been dismissed in front of the world. Analysts warned that the optics weakened not just Trump but also the credibility of American institutions abroad. If the president appeared unwilling to defend his own intelligence agencies, how could foreign partners trust America to defend their interests? That question lingered in the halls of government and international summits long after the cameras were gone. On the campaign trail, the incident was replayed endlessly. Opponents used it to paint Trump as a leader who bent to strongmen rather than confronting them. In speeches, debates, and advertisements, the footage of his hesitant body language and deferential remarks became shorthand for weakness. For voters already skeptical of his leadership style, this moment crystallized their doubts. For his supporters, defending the event required creative explanations, often framing it as part of a grand strategy, but even those narratives struggled against the viral imagery of Trump appearing overshadowed. Political campaigns are battles of perception, and this episode provided powerful ammunition. The fallout extended internationally, where America's allies expressed unease. European leaders quietly voiced frustration, concerned that the United States might not be the steadfast partner it once was. NATO members, in particular, worried that the apparent imbalance between Putin and Trump signaled a shift in American resolve. Some diplomats openly admitted that the event forced them to reconsider their strategies, preparing for the possibility that Washington could no longer be relied upon to project consistent strength. The embarrassment wasn't just about one leader, it threatened to reshape alliances and recalibrate global expectations of U.S. leadership. Meanwhile, Russia seized the opportunity to capitalize on the perception of victory. Russian state media celebrated the moment as proof of Putin's dominance, framing it as a geopolitical win. This narrative strengthened Putin's domestic image, bolstering his role as a leader who could stand toe-to-toe with the American president and come out ahead. For Russia, the fallout was a strategic gift, providing propaganda value at home and leverage abroad. The contrast between American outrage and Russian triumph only reinforced the sense of imbalance. Back in the U.S., the fallout seeped into everyday discourse. Late-night shows kept mocking the event, political pundits replayed it for weeks, and ordinary citizens debated it across social media. The incident became more than politics, it was culture, symbolism, and drama all rolled into one. Trump, who often thrived on dominating headlines, found himself trapped in a cycle where every attempt to move on was dragged back to the humiliation. The more he tried to downplay it, the more it was replayed, dissected, and used against him. The long-term effects were equally significant. Foreign leaders now had a blueprint for how to approach Trump, understanding that his need to avoid confrontation could be exploited. Domestic opponents gained a powerful tool to question his credibility, and even future presidents inherited the shadow of that moment when stepping onto the world stage. It became a cautionary tale in diplomacy, a reminder that missteps in posture, tone, and firmness can reverberate far beyond a single meeting. In the end, the political fallout was less about the specific words exchanged and more about the image that lingered. Putin was seen as composed and in command, while Trump was viewed as defensive and diminished. That contrast defined the aftermath, shaping perceptions of Trump's presidency in ways that no amount of spin could fully undo. Politics is about power, and power is about perception. On that global stage, the perception was clear: Trump had been overshadowed, and the fallout ensured that the humiliation would not be forgotten.